And I'd heard back in maybe 2000 that Kit Green couldn't get briefed into the alien autopsy program. So when he's discussing...
Wait. You heard this in 2000?
Yeah. I heard that he was trying, he could not get in.
Yeah.
And because he was a physiologist, a doctor, that's what he was interested in. Not so much the other stuff. And he couldn't. And I heard that. So when I heard the discussion when he was having with you...
He stated that very explicitly to me.
And I'd heard that like at least a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago. I heard that he was frustrated that he couldn't get in, and that's what he wanted to see was the autopsy thing.
Right.
And so to me, it was like these guys, because I used to see some of their emails. The odd email would they would email with each other. When I'd see.
Can we ask, like, how do you remember how you heard that in 2000 or so? Did you have one of that crowd?
I think it was. I think it was Eric Davis who told me.
Well, Eric Davis. Now we know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, and because they all worked together. Like Eric Davis did papers with Kit Green. They all worked on different projects, and that's what I see. Is these guys? They're not evil guys. They're just guys like you and I. That you get 10% and you want the other 90. And where are you going to go?
Right.
It's like Bigelow. You're going to go to the people who know. So it's like you go to Kit Green. I listen to everything Kit, and I've been listening to these guys all the time. So whatever they say, I may not believe what they say, but when Kit Green talks, I listen. When John Alexander talks, I listen. When Bigelow talks, I listen. Even you get these clues, and you even see that Knapp indicated that Bigelow was giving hints. That in 2007 he went on Knapp's show and basically said that they had this program going and the money was coming and there was money wasn't coming from the government it wasn't how do you put it? But he said there was money, a new funder, and this is the thing where all the people had to sign off from MUFON with non-disclosure. Yeah, and the money was coming from the government. And then in 2013, if you go back and listen to these guys' interviews, you realize they were all in on it before, because Bigelow actually says what happens in the New York Times. Knapp is interviewing him in 2013, and he says, "Are you in favor of disclosure?" And he said, "No, I'm not. I'm in favor of confirmation."
That's right.
What you do first is you say UFOs are real, and we don't really know what's going on. You do not bring up aliens. You don't bring in that stuff. You bring that up years later, and then you see the New York Times thing. We've got UFOs. There's a mystery, but it's not aliens. It's not ET. We're not saying.
Kind of like his
exactly
version
what Bigelow said in 2013. Almost like that was the pattern, and everybody followed the pattern. So it would make sense that Bigelow would bring in these people who are the experts, the same as you and I listen to them, and that they would listen to each other because they realize. And there's probably I've heard up to 200 people in this invisible college thing. That they've got these people, religion professors and people that are sort of on the edge, like this Tyler D. from NASA and all these people, stuff like that. And it's the same thing. We don't want to be identified, but they're all interacting with each other and talking to each other because everybody's trying to figure it out. They're just curious, and whereas people think it's like a government thing, and it's like, no, I mean...
Think about what you're describing here. This is a larger and larger and more out there group of very, very brilliant, highly qualified people. And it's becoming more and more obvious to outsiders looking in that this is serious forward motion that's happening here.
Yeah.
Like this is, this is just more information that's out there that's not going to get back in. So there's definitely been a qualitative change in this. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see this hitting the public in a wider. They just don't have the details that you and I have, because you and I can see it very clearly now. Right. Even have you read the Jacques Vallée's third book? Not yet. No, not yet.
The third book is the best.
Yeah.
Because I just go to the index and I look up Hell Put Off, and there's like 25 entries on Hell Put Off.
This is really important stuff that Vallée's putting out.
Yeah, and I even go to like Art Lundahl was one that was one of the guys before.
He was the top at the weird desk.
Supposedly briefed 3 presidents. Yeah. So I go and I look, and Vallée had all sorts of conversations with this guy. And this is
Lundahl is super brilliant.
And so you go through Vallée's thing, and he's talking about all these guys. It's all of them. Right. And you go and you see all these conversations, and he's actually outing these guys. All these conversations they had in the 1980s with the Avery and the CIA and this sort of stuff. It's fascinating. I guess it's just the public has to be brought up to who these guys are. And even in the UFO community, most of the people, I think you would agree, didn't pay any attention to these people until you went with the document. Now they're all sort of experts on Kit Green and Put Off and stuff. But
you've
known, and I've known.
Yeah.
I mean, you've known these guys for a long time as well, and you realize like these guys are legitimate. They're hardworking people, and that they're just trying to figure it out, and they've got more access than you and I have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know how much time we have, but I would love to ask. Can we talk about the Davis Sarfati feud?
Oh yeah.
Can we get into that?
Yeah.
You can have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Before we have to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're on our own little deadline.
This
here,
is
aren't we?
almost like what happened before. Like from time to time, and I was in this circle, and I sort of said things I shouldn't have said, and they sort of cut me out of the circle.
You?
So yeah. so this is another. And I guess what happened.
Grant cannot be contained. Like everyone's laughing here. You just cannot. I think you're like where my mother now is in life. My mother's at the point where she's like, I don't care about this anymore. I'm just going to say what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I think you just joined that club.
Yeah, that's right. I think I've always been in that club. It's sort of like, but anyway, so now there's this new email chain, and I was never on it, but I got on it.
I wasn't on. I'm now only getting up to speed on this.
Yeah.
So I've been following this. So
and I think it was because I have this rumor that I've got these contacts with Pandolfi. I've never talked to Pandolfi. I've never. But I have people all around him. I watch, and whatever he tells them, I listen and stuff.
Right.
So I guess they fed it to me because they were taking a shot at Pandolfi. So I sent it to my people, and I knew they were going to send it to Pandolfi, and I'd maybe hope get a comment back or whatever. And then I got on this chain, and it started going, and then this big war breaks out where they're talking about...
For people who don't know, that look, within our little circle, there's always these little email chains. So like there'll be maybe 5 or 10 or 20 people on the thread, and they just keep it to themselves all through email. And what's happening is a smackdown between Eric Davis and Jack Sarfati.
The two big physicists.
Right. Over the metamaterial fundamentally.
So Eric Davis is the guy that TTSA, if they have any scientific programs, he's going to be running them. He's like the big, sort of like the next guy after Put-Off, because Put-Off's in his 80s, whatever. So he's got an intelligence background. He worked in intelligence, and he's got this very strong scientific background. Plus, he's an experiencer. He has this UFO sighting when he's doing his graduation for his PhD. Him and his wife see this daylight thing flying over the top. So he fits all the. And
he has written a large number of really brilliant, forward-thinking papers.
Yeah.
I mean,
and very, very smart guy. And he's sort of like me. If you get him going, if you get him privately and get him going. I mean, he just talks, and lots of times he says things he probably shouldn't be saying. And so you get him, and then you get Jack Sarfati. For people who don't know, Jack Sarfati is always this guy who has the experience when he's 12 years old, where he gets the phone call from the computer on board the ship, and his mother said,
"You are one of the 400.
We're going to give you our
chosen people." Yes.
So he believes he's chosen, and then he has this bizarre thing: we're going to come back in 20 years. And so in 20 years, Uri Geller comes to America, and he's reading this. And he says he's going to SRI, and then he really falls down the rabbit hole because he phones up SRI, and he said, I'm going to England, but I got a couple of days, and you got this Uri Geller guy. And they said, oh, Dr. Sarfati, we've been expecting your call. And he went, what? And so he figures these are part of the 400 guys. So he's linked all these people, but he's always never had a security clearance. He's always been sort of the weird physics professor on the outside.
And he's been fighting with Put-Off for years and years and years.
On zero-point energy.
Yeah,
and now the new debate is on this piece that Linda Howe got from...
in the 90s. Well, it was sent to Art Bell.
Yeah.
Allegedly a crash retrieval of a UFO from the 1940s.
Yeah.
Allegedly. But Bell got it in the 90s, so we have it that far back. He gives it to Linda Moulton House, so she can send it out to some scientists to examine. And one of those was Put-Off.
Yeah.
And Put-Off and Davis.
And TTSA asked for it, so she gave a time limit. You got so long, you can have it for so long.
Does Linda still control that piece?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's what happened. So they have this thing, and it kind of surprised me. And my take on the whole thing was, because we were having a discussion a couple weeks ago about who's right, because they're basically having a fight. Like I've got the answer, you don't have the answer.
I just want to try to explain this best I can for people. So what Sarfati said, because I listened carefully. I mean, I'm a non-physicist.
Yeah.
So I did my best. I listened to Sarfati's explanation as carefully and slowly as I could, and I stopped and I wrote it down and took my notes. And so my take on Sarfati is as follows. He's analyzing this metamaterial. He's talking about the metamaterial, and he argues that the metamaterial, by its very nature, is somehow able to slow down the speed of light when light interacts with it. And by doing so, you're changing equations. One of the equations you're changing is Alcubierre's warp drive equation, essentially. Everyone seems to agree that Miguel Alcubierre correctly did the math of warp drive back in the 1990s. The problem is it's always been the amount of energy required to achieve this warping of space-time has always been considered to be way, way, way beyond anything that we're able to generate. And Sarfati, in this interview from just about a year ago, is saying, nope, that's not the case. The metamaterial changes the speed of light. When you radically reduce the speed of light, you are able, as he puts it, to soften the space-time barrier around the craft, and you don't need a whole lot of energy. And he almost whimsically says maybe a AAA battery would be enough to do it. Now that's a wow moment. The question is it right? Like, I listened to that and I thought, well, that actually, from my non-scientific perspective, actually seems to dovetail with what Puthoff said at his 2018 SSE speech, where he's essentially not giving the kind of detail scientifically, but I thought if you're getting a kind of anti-gravitic effect, as Puthoff was definitely hinting, then maybe it is in the material. Maybe something like that's happening. Anyway, I don't really know, but that's where it left for me until we come across this thread where Eric Davis, who's really Puthoff's guy,
the big guy, from
is telling Sarfati, stop talking about this. You don't know what you're talking about, and go back to consciousness and things that aren't actually real physics. Like that's essentially what he's telling. You
destroyed this part of physics. Right. You're putting together dots that don't exist.
Yeah, like on this private little email thread, which is now leaked out.
Yeah.
So, and Sarfati is not someone that you can just do a smackdown on either.
Yeah,
like he
just
throws it right back.
He
just throws it right back. So the question is, who's right? And I don't know. I don't know how to judge that.
And to me, the thing that struck me is that I really don't care who's right.
I think the betting money is on Davis, though. Like all the little people that I've talked to, I don't think anyone's willing to bet against Eric Davis on this.
Yeah. And Sarfati's been for 20 years. So he used to have a board back when the internet started. I remember he used to watch the board then, but it had all this mathematics. And he's always been fighting with Puthoff. They've always been at odds. About, I know about zero-point energy, you don't, and all this sort of stuff. And so when I saw the thing, what impressed me was, I'm going, they're having a fight over this thing, and this is like the layered piece of metal. It's like 2-ounce piece of metal, and I'm thinking, if these two top guys, because Sarfati makes the point that the physics world is a very small world. You know the Nobel guys,
exactly.
You know everybody.
This is a big
if something
part of
were happening, I would know. And they actually asked him in one interview, do you think we have the technology? He said, no, I would know. We do not have the tech. Yeah. And that's what struck me, is these two guys are fighting, and I'm thinking, they can't levitate this piece of metal off the table, and I'm going...
But can they? I mean, are they absolutely unable to?
Well, Sarfati says, no, we can't do anything. We can't do...
Is he actually doing the experiments, though? Or is he just looking
No, Sarfati is all
far?
Theoretical, totally theoretical.
Yeah, he's not in the lab with Davis and Puthoff.
No. That's the thing. He's got no security clearance, and he's just a theoretical physicist.
What's actually happening there? I mean, did I get the wrong impression? I thought Puthoff was implying that there's a gravitic effect on this.
Theoretically. Because that's what Linda said, because they had the thing with the terahertz. She's linking it into John Rowe's injury and the reports coming out of the Rendlesham, the British reports.
Personally, no offense, but I think that's a stretch.
Okay, but I think that's where they're linking in. So she goes to Puthoff, and so Puthoff's theoretical thing is, if we hit this with enough terahertz energy, it will levitate the piece. It'll float the piece. So Linda's saying to him, well, do it. And he says, well, we don't have it. And then she says, well, what about the black world? And then Puthoff indicates, no, we haven't not got anything in the black world that can create that kind of terahertz energy as well.
Yeah, you need like a focused terahertz directed.
You need a huge...
and I don't think that, from what I've learned, we're at like baby steps in generating terahertz.
Yeah. So that's what impressed me, was that they haven't got this technology. So then it's like, what do they have? So when I see the latest statement by the Navy, that may be disclosure. So they go to Trump. So Trump's reaction was, I don't really believe this. Yeah. So what they may know is, we've got all these videos. They were interacting with the Nimitz. They were doing all this sort of stuff. Right. We have all the photos. It's unidentified. We really don't know what it is. Even though we've got crash material, we got bodies, it's almost like the core story. Remember the core story? Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, and Jacques Vallée go to the Denny's restaurant in 1987, and they sit down and say, what do we know for sure about this? And the core story is...
Tell people this,
we're being interacted by some sort of intelligence, ET, whatever it is. There has been recovered material, and we really don't know anything. We can't do it. And that's what Eric Davis said on Coast to Coast. He went on Coast to Coast and he said, we shut down the program in 1989 because we had the material, but we couldn't do anything. It's so far beyond us. And then George Knapp comes out and hints that every 7 or 8 years they take it off the table and see if we can do anything, and discover if we can't, put it back on the table again, that they really don't have any technology. That was what impressed me about these two guys, is it sort of confirmed the fact that...
This is totally consistent with everything in the Wilson document.
Yeah, and it's
right?
That's in the Wilson document as well at the end there. This high-level guy that even the Joint Chiefs of Staff guy can't get. This other guy gets the briefing and he says, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, by the way, so relating to that whole thing, I know we're bouncing around like ping pong balls off the wall here.
And we haven't even taken questions yet.
But one thing Kit Green said to me in our interview this last summer was in relation to government access to these special access programs.
Yeah.
So I got to put this carefully because I don't want to put Kit Green into... Kit Green gave me an explicit on the record statement about the Wilson document.
Yeah.
Which is actually a wonderful on-the-record statement. It's like, I'm giving an accurate paraphrase. I'm not supposed to talk about this despite the fact that I've read it, despite the fact that I know about it. So because I can't talk about it, I'm just going to say I'm not in a position to comment on the authenticity of this document, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Okay, that's his on-the-record statement. Then he gave me an off-the-record statement, which, by the way, I asked him, am I allowed to tell the world that you gave me an off-the-record statement? He said yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add that his off-the-record statement with me was like 30 minutes long. Like we had an exceptionally detailed conversation about the Wilson document. And one of his many insights about that document was simply that he said, look, a guy like Wilson, he said, theoretically, hypothetically, a guy like Wilson did believe that he would have had access to this, but he was totally wrong.
Exactly.
He was totally wrong. By the way, this is another criticism of the authenticity of the document. Someone said, well, Wilson would have no authority to look into these programs. That is true, but it's not necessarily true that Wilson would have known that.
Yeah.
It's not true at all.
Yeah, the only person that knows is the person who gave the clearances. You don't know unless you're the guy that's
what Green told me, I'll have to look into this, but he said Secretary of Defense William Perry in the first either year or two of the Clinton White House in 93 or 94 did a partial reorg of the Pentagon, and one of the things he did was to bury the special access programs even deeper within the system, making it virtually inaccessible for all but the smallest number of people. So Green's telling me, here's Wilson, hypothetically, thinking that he would have access to this program, and he said, of course he wouldn't. And it was to Green, it was just such an obvious thing.
Yeah.
He said, look, the U.S. government provides money and infrastructure for these programs, but it's the private corporations that really are running it. It's all private corporations running it.
Yeah.
So Wilson, he's out of the loop.
Yeah, because people need to know the need to know part. Because there was the argument made about John Alexander, the thing that he went to all the deputies and the heads and whatever like that. And the counter argument
was,
was,
and he got nothing within the government.
You're a colonel in the U.S. Army. We don't need a colonel. We need a physicist. So you may have a guy who's way lower, like just basically the janitor might have, because he works in the lab. He's got a higher security clearance, more need to know than John Alexander. Because you have a high title, people mistake that. Because you have a high title doesn't mean you have a high security clearance. It's your need to know.
We're getting the 5-minute marker here. So one other thing that Green said, and this is all relevant. He said, look, I was 20 years in the CIA, and I had, apparently he had some pretty good security clearances at that time. He says, when I retired from the CIA and I went off to work at General Motors as an executive there, he said my clearances became more plentiful and better. Yeah. And he said, I think his phrase was, that is exquisitely typical of people in the classified world. So when you're in the federal government, I think the common assumption is that, oh, well, you're in the government, then you've got better security clearances. And it's not the case. It's exactly the opposite. And the reason, as he pointed out, is because in private industries where all the brain power is, it's where all the money is, it's where all the action is. And so if you're doing a program, that's where the people are. And that's why your clearances become better. So when John Alexander, back in the 1980s, did his door knocking and trying to find out, is there a UFO program, and he got nothing, and he uses that as his reason to say, well, there's no UFO cover up because I've looked for it. That's the most ridiculous, silly kind of explanation.
Wasn't there a comment that I think was Joe Bookman asked Hal Puthoff at that thing.
Yes, at SSE.
And he basically is referring to John Alexander.
That's
and
right.
he basically says, just because you're a friend, it doesn't mean you get access.
That was actually a really funny question, and that's on Vimeo. People, I think you can still drop $5 and you can watch that lecture on Vimeo, and it's worth it. And at the very end, yes, and it is Joe, who's our friend. We've known him for a while, and he's a very sharp guy for sure, very knowledgeable. And he asked a question of Puthoff about John Alexander.
He's good friends with John too. That's the whole thing. He's Charles Rowan.
And he says, if John Alexander has said, like, he has looked around for a cover-up, found no evidence, and he asked Puthoff to comment on it.
Yeah.
And Puthoff was, pretty diplomatic about it. But essentially, I think the answer is, well, if you don't have the scientific chops, you're not going to be led into the program.
Yeah. And
they won't need you.
And I guess we should point out, these guys are like Kit Green was a contractor, so was Puthoff and stuff. Yeah. And that I think people got to know, because there's still, it always comes back, is that you know them, I know them. They're just ordinary guys who are very smart. Right. Who are very intense. They're into the mystery and stuff, and they're not the bad guys. There's this misconception, and that whatever they say to me, I listen very carefully.
Right.
That these are the guys. If you want the answer, you've got to listen to these guys. That they're doing the best. Even when Puthoff started his speech, he said, I've talked about remote viewing a lot of times. I've never talked about UFOs. The indication, I would have put me in jail. Now I can talk about it, and he's been given the green light.
He's talked with us about UFOs. He's talked with me about UFOs, but that's right, like never publicly.
That was the first lecture he actually gave, where he said, now I'm allowed to talk about TTSA.
And I have to say, I'm not buddies with Hal Puthoff, but I consider myself a friend of his, and I respect him so very much. I think he's got integrity, and that doesn't mean that he's told me everything he knows. He hasn't.
Yeah.
There's a lot that I don't know. But I've never believed that he's lied to me. I've never believed that he's tried to lead me astray.
I would agree with all of them. I mean, they're just honest guys who are
and
just like you and I.
as well.
And they're in a difficult position in terms of having security clearances and stuff.
And the last thing I want to say, and then you say what you want, but the leak of the Wilson document, this was a very unwelcome thing for them. Yeah. They did not want it. They had nothing to do with this, and they did not want it. And the word that I got from... I don't like to throw these names around because I don't want to get someone in trouble, but I got a definite word that a number of the people in TTSA were actually really... they weren't just indifferent, like what Semivan said. They were actually annoyed.
Yeah.
And they were annoyed at the fact that one person said that Edgar Mitchell's files were like in such an open condition that they could just be moved out. Like, this was a sensitive conversation. So there was actually a very unwelcome element to it among the TTSA people.
Plus you dropped it the first and second week of their series. So you sort of took away their...
Well, I didn't. I mean...
Well, that's when it started to go public, and it was sort of like they figured they were going to be the big star, and suddenly there was this new story that was more dramatic than what they were putting out.
Well, yeah, that's true. But it also went against their kind of controlled narrative. Yeah. They had a very specific... There's a UAP, potential threat.
Exactly.
We don't know what they are. And suddenly you have this document coming out talking about, they know all about crash retrievals and attempted reverse engineering. Like, that goes way farther than we don't know what these things are.
And it sort of went opposing to their message.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that was what was unwelcome. Aside from the fact that they were all embarrassed, you have Puthoff and Green. They've each had half a century of high-level sensitive compartment and information clearances, and now their names in these various documents are out there. That's not welcome.
In fact,
for them.
I think I mentioned that before. There was a leak before, and the word they used me was intelligence blowback. That when things like this happen, they all just sort of sit there and wonder what kind of reaction from the top. Like, why the hell did you say this? Why did you talk to Bigelow or whatever? And they sit there and wait. And to see, do we have any jobs left or whatever. So you have to realize that it's sort of like they should never have talked about this. They shouldn't have put it on paper. They should have controlled Edgar Mitchell's files or whatever.
They're working their way. They're navigating their way in.
And it was all going great. And all of a sudden, boom.
And you can fall right off the path.
Yeah.
So.
Wonderful.
Our producers are walking away here.
In the other room,
and we got a producer here.
Future plans.
There you go. Okay. Well, it was wonderful to talk. And thanks. Welcome to Canada.
I love it. We have to do this again.
Yeah.
This is like our little running commentary.
Yeah. This is excellent. Wonderful.
Where did we do
Hopefully
this?
People learn stuff.
Where were we? Oh, we were in the UK.
We were in the UK.
We did this before.
So
I keep forgetting. So anyway, now we're in Toronto. Next time we're together, we'll do another one.
There you go. It was wonderful. I think people will learn something.
Yeah, I think that was great.